Look at it. Paper, numbers, a glowing screen in your hand. Something so simple, so ordinary. And yet somehow, you've built your entire life around it. You wake up for it. You plan your days around it. You make decisions because of it. Sometimes, you even sacrifice moments that actually matter for something you were never truly taught to understand. You open your banking app. You see a number. Maybe it's higher than last month, and for a brief moment, you feel relief. A quiet sense of control, like things are going in the right direction. But if it drops, even slightly, something inside you shifts, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough to change how you think, how you act, how you feel about your own life. And that's the strange part. Nothing in your reality actually changed. Your relationships are still the same. Your health is still the same. Your day is still the same. But a number moved, and suddenly your sense of safety moved with it. So let's pause here, because this is where most people never stop to ask the question that actually matters. What exactly is money? Is it security? Is it freedom? Is it power? Or is it something deeper, something operating quietly in the background, shaping how you live without you even noticing? Because the truth is, most people don't understand money. They understand earning. They understand spending. They understand saving. But they don't understand the system behind it. A system that doesn't just move money, but shapes behavior. A system that influences how you think about success, how you define stability, and how you choose to spend your time. And once you begin to see that system clearly, everything starts to shift. Not all at once, but in a way that changes how you see your life from that point forward. Because once you understand money, you don't just handle it differently, you start living differently. Level 1. The small gear. This is where almost everyone begins, and where most people quietly remain. Your day starts with a sound, an alarm. Not because your body is ready, but because your schedule demands it. You open your eyes, you check the time, and almost immediately, your day belongs to something else. You get up, you prepare, you move through the same routine, again, and again, and again. The road looks the same, the office looks the same. The conversations feel familiar. Deadlines, meetings, tasks that need to be done, whether they mean something to you or not. And in exchange for all of it, you receive money, a predictable amount, at a predictable time. It feels stable, it feels responsible. And over time, it becomes normal. You begin to measure your progress by that number. If it increases, you feel like you're moving forward. If it stays the same, you feel stuck. And if it drops, you feel pressure. So naturally, you try to improve it. Work harder, stay longer, be more efficient, maybe aim for a promotion, maybe look for something that pays more. And all of that makes sense, because from the outside, it looks like progress. But here's what quietly sits underneath all of it. You are trading time for money. And time is the one thing you can never get back. There are only so many hours in a day, only so many years you can actively work. And no matter how capable you are, that limit never changes. So even when your income increases, your model stays the same. More effort for more return. And because it works, you rarely question it. You save money, you put it in the bank, you watch it grow slowly, and it gives you a sense of control, a sense that you're building something. But at the same time, something else is happening. Quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. The value of that money is changing. Prices rise, costs increase. What your money can do slowly shrinks. But because it happens over time, you don't feel it all at once, so you keep going. You stay disciplined. You stay consistent. You keep trading time for numbers, hoping that eventually it will be enough. But for many people, that feeling never fully arrives. Because at this level, no matter how hard you work, you are still inside the same loop, a loop that rewards effort but limits freedom, a loop that keeps you busy but rarely gives you control. And at some point, whether you realize it or not, You are no longer choosing it. You are simply continuing it. At this level, you don't control money. You respond to it. You adjust your life around it, and slowly, without noticing, money begins to control you. Level 2, the leveraged operator. And then, at some point, something begins to shift. Not loudly, not suddenly, just a quiet moment where something doesn't feel right anymore. You start to notice patterns. You see people working incredibly hard, but not really moving forward, and others who don't seem as busy, but somehow keep progressing. That contrast makes you pause. And instead of asking, how can I work more? Or how can I earn a higher salary? You begin to ask a different question. How does money actually work? That question is the beginning of everything. Welcome to Level 2, the leveraged operator. At this level, you begin to realize something simple but powerful. Money doesn't have to come only from your time. It can come from structure, from systems, from decisions made once that continue to create value over time. You start to look at things differently, not just as expenses, but as assets. Things that can produce income, things that can grow, even when you're not actively involved. And for the first time, you begin to separate effort from outcome. You learn about leverage, not in a complicated technical way, but in a practical sense, using what you have to create more than you could alone. It could be capital, it could be knowledge, it could be other people's systems. The details don't matter as much as the principle. You are no longer relying on a single input. You are expanding what's possible. So instead of asking, how many hours will this take me? You start asking, what can this create over time? That shift changes how you see everything. Work becomes more intentional. Decisions become more strategic. You start noticing opportunities where before you only saw tasks, and slowly your relationship with money begins to change. You're not just earning it anymore, you're directing it, placing it, allowing it to move in ways that create more value. And when it works, the results feel different, not just bigger, but more scalable, less tied to your daily effort, more connected to how well you think. At this level, you start to feel something new, possibility, the sense that maybe you don't have to stay in the same loop forever, but there's something important to understand. Even here, you are still inside the system. You're using it better. You're moving faster, but you're still operating within rules that already exist. You didn't design them. You're just learning how to navigate them. And beyond this level, there's another shift, a deeper one, where it's no longer about using money, but about understanding how it flows at a much larger scale. Level 3, the allocator. As you move further, another shift begins to happen. Subtle at first, but once you notice it, you can't ignore it. You stop thinking about money as something you need to make and start seeing it as something that moves constantly from one place to another, from one idea to another, from one decision to the next. And wherever it flows, it creates change, growth, expansion, or decline. Welcome to Level 3, the allocator. At this level, your focus changes completely. You're no longer asking, how do I increase my income? You're asking, where should capital go to create the most impact? That's a very different question, because now you're not just working inside the system, you're influencing outcomes within it. You begin to see that money is a force, and like any force, its power depends on direction. If it's scattered, it creates very little. But when it's focused, it can build something significant. So you start making decisions with more intention. You allocate resources, time, capital, attention, not randomly, but deliberately. You invest in opportunities that extend beyond your personal effort. You support systems that can grow without your constant input. You begin to understand scale. The idea that results don't have to grow step by step. They can expand, multiply, accelerate, and with that, your role changes. You're no longer just doing the work. You're deciding where the work happens. You're not just creating value. You're positioning yourself where value is created. And that distinction changes everything. At this level, you also begin to notice something else. The people who move the fastest are not always the ones working the hardest. They're the ones making better decisions about where things go, where energy goes, where capital goes, where focus goes. Because once those decisions are made correctly, the system begins to work for them. Not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently. However, even at this level, there is still a boundary. Because no matter how well you allocate, you are still choosing between options that already exist. You are still reacting to a structure that someone else designed. You have influence, but not full control. And beyond this level, there's another shift, one that moves faster, operates deeper, and exists in a space most people never even see. Level 4, the market maker. And then, there's another shift, not just in what you do, but in how fast everything starts to move. At first, it feels almost invisible. Small advantages, better timing, clearer positioning. But over time, you begin to notice something deeper. The game is not just about decisions, it's about speed. Welcome to Level 4, the market maker. At this level, you are no longer waiting for opportunities to become obvious. You're operating in a space where things are still forming, where patterns are not yet clear, but already in motion. And the difference comes down to awareness. You begin to see how information flows, how reactions happen, how behavior repeats itself in cycles. And once you see those patterns, you don't just respond to them. You position yourself ahead of them. Because in this environment, being slightly earlier, slightly more informed, or slightly more precise can change everything. Tiny edges, when repeated at scale, become significant. Not through effort, but through structure, through systems, through consistency. At this level, you're no longer thinking in days or even weeks. You're thinking in flows, continuous movement, constant adjustment. You're not just acting, you're observing, measuring, refining. And over time, you begin to understand something important. The market is not random. It feels unpredictable from the outside, but underneath, it follows patterns. Behavioral patterns, structural patterns, incentive-driven patterns. And once you understand those, you stop treating the market as something to chase. You start interacting with it with intention. But even here, there's still a limitation. Because no matter how advanced your systems are, no matter how quickly you move, you are still operating within a framework that already exists, a structure that defines the boundaries of the game. You didn't build it, you learned how to navigate it. Very well, but not completely. And beyond that framework, there's something else, something quieter, less visible, but far more powerful, something that doesn't just move within the system, but shapes the system itself. Level 5, the system and then. There's the final shift, not faster, not louder, but deeper. Welcome to Level 5. The system. At this level, you stop looking at money as something you earn, or invest, or even allocate. You begin to see it as part of something larger, a structure, a framework that defines how everything below operates. Because money doesn't exist in isolation. It moves within rules, rules that determine how it's created, how it's distributed, and how it changes over time. Interest rates, monetary policy, regulation, concepts that most people hear but rarely stop to understand. And yet, these are the forces that quietly shape everything. The cost of living, the value of savings, the opportunities that appear, and the ones that disappear. At this level, you begin to see the system not as something abstract, but as something real, something structured, something that influences behavior on a massive scale. And once you see that, something shifts again. You stop assuming that outcomes are random. You stop believing that effort alone explains everything, because you start to recognize there are layers. Layers of influence, layers of structure, layers that most people never even notice. And it's not because they can't understand it, it's because they never pause long enough to question it. For most people, The system is simply something they live inside. They work, they earn, they save, and they move forward without ever asking, why does it work this way? Who decides these rules? And how does it all connect? But a few people take a different path. They slow down, they observe, they begin to connect the dots. And once those connections are made, it becomes impossible to see things the same way again. Because the truth is, you don't step outside the system. You don't suddenly escape it, but you do gain something most people never reach: clarity. You begin to see where you are, how things move, what influences what, and with that awareness, your decisions change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently. You move with more intention, you question more carefully, you choose more consciously, and over time, that changes everything. Because most people will remain where they started. Level 1. Following the same pattern. Repeating the same cycle, day after day, year after year. But a few will begin to see beyond it, not because they're different, but because they asked different questions. And once you see it, you don't need to react the same way anymore. You don't need to follow blindly. You don't need to move without thinking. Because now, you understand. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to move differently, to live differently, to choose differently. And in the end, that's what makes the real difference. The system doesn't disappear. It doesn't change for you. But once you understand it, you stop living inside it the same way. And for most people, that realization never comes.